about the what about the flip-flopping on the Tomahawk missiles? So essentially, he hinted that they will supply Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. Then after the call with Putin, in the meeting with Zelensky, it's off the table. Two reasons that were reported. One is Putin convinced him to not do so. And the other argument, and it's a fair argument as well, is that stockpiles are running out in the US.
I think that both arguments are valid, but the second one is very definitely important. And it's obvious from President Trump's remarks within the last 48 to 72 hours that he is well aware of just how low the numbers of missiles are in our inventory. If you're sitting in the Department of Defense, what you do is that you look at the numbers of missiles, all types of missiles, standard everything. Then you look at the number of launchers and how many cells are in each launcher. Then you simply multiply, you do the mathematics, and you know that you have to have as a minimum 3 per cell in every launcher. So if you have 6 cells, that means that you've got 18 missiles for that launcher. Now that's minimum. Ideally, they like to have 5 per each cell. Why? Because it's a war of attrition. How many missiles can you fire? How many can they fire back at you, and so forth? We are a maritime and naval power. This is very important. People don't get this. We are not a land power in Europe or anywhere in the Eastern Hemisphere. Russia is a continental power. It's a land power. They're not competing with us at sea with a large surface fleet. They don't need it. They maintain a substantial and capable submarine fleet as a means of protection and defense, but that's it. Their Air Force is modest compared to what we employ, but they're not in the business of projecting their military power into the Caribbean, into the Gulf of Mexico, or now the Gulf of America. They're not projecting power into Canada. We're the ones projecting power into the Eastern Hemisphere. So my point is, we have to have a lot more on hand in our magazines that are already deployed before we fight. And he got the message. We can't.
What are the stockpiles like now? How many per launcher would you say? The preference is 5. But if you had to take a wild guess,
I can't do that. That's too close to the reality. And my point is simply this: we have many, many types of missiles, many munitions. All of these are accounted for. You look at your sustainability. How long can you fight with what you have? And right now, we're on the ragged edge of not lasting very long. This came up when we were engaged with Iran. You saw what happened in Israel. Israel ran out, effectively, of its anti-missiles, its air and missile defense, and it was also running low in strike missiles. We shot a lot of our air and missile defense to protect them. Now, have we recovered? Yes, we've recovered somewhat. But to really recover, you need years. Remember, we are not running manufacturing assembly lines for weapons 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The Russians are. They are running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We can't surge that quickly. And here's the last point that needs to be borne in mind. Russia is allied with China. China has the largest manufacturing base in the world. The Chinese will run off as many missiles, rockets, bombs, whatever you want to call them, as required to support Russia. So we're in kind of a bad position strategically. All of the behavior and comments and statements that President Trump has made were never very carefully thought through. I think probably General Kane, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, he's the senior military advisor to the president, has gotten his attention and made this clear. So that's absolutely true. The first part, did Putin convince him of anything? If anything, I think President Putin said, this is another step in escalation. Do you really want to escalate the war with Russia? Because you're going to
threaten with something, maybe.
What?
Could he make a threat? If you do this, we will do that, and then Trump was caught off guard. Maybe not worth the gamble.
Putin is not like Trump. He doesn't threaten and bully people. He simply says, if you do this, if you provide X number of Tomahawk missiles, and remember, you've got air-launched, sea-launched, and then you have ground-launched. Most of our Tomahawks are air and sea launched. Only a small number are available for the U.S. Army to be launched from trucks. Now, those trucks with those missiles, perhaps 20, perhaps 30, perhaps 40, we don't know. could be available to the Ukrainians. However, American soldiers or contractors who are former American soldiers probably would have to operate those systems. That is a dramatic increase in the escalatory approach to war. That means that Americans and American systems are actively employing these against Russia, not inside Ukraine. We're talking about targets inside Russia. And somebody said, well, we'll just shoot these at refineries, or we'll shoot these at nuclear power plants, God forbid. That would be a disaster, because, the Russians have gone to great lengths to insulate the one in Zaporizhzhia, which they control, from the war. But Ukraine has, I think, 2 or 3 more nuclear power stations. The point is, they could also accidentally end up in a civilian area. In other words, an area where the population lives, and kill large numbers of Russians. I don't think it takes much imagination to figure out that with 1,000+ mile range, that kind of damage is not going to change the outcome of the war. It's not going to make any difference to whether or not Ukraine survives or doesn't. But it could escalate the tensions to the point where the Russians decide to abandon any restraint and move forward. And I think President Trump recognized that, and he says, I don't want a war with Russia. And he doesn't.
So that was my next question, is what could it change things on the ground? Because Ukraine does have the Flamingo missiles, less capable, but they can strike deep into Russia. How much better are the Tomahawk missiles compared to the Flamingo missiles?
I don't know as much about the Flamingo missile. I don't know, is it a hypersonic missile? If it's not, it doesn't make much difference. See, the Tomahawk is not hypersonic. Tomahawks were shot down by Syrian air defenses when Trump was in office. He launched Tomahawks into the desert in Syria under false pretenses. These were false flags created by MI6, accusing the Assad regime of gassing its own people. Nonsense like that was not true. But unfortunately, President Trump reacted emotionally to pictures of children that were allegedly victims of this. He launched these missiles. The Syrians shot several of them down. In 1999, the Serb air defenses shot many of our Tomahawk missiles down. We don't admit to it, but they did. So these are not hypersonic. You could shoot.
Neither is the Flamingo, by the way.
Okay, well, if that's the case for the Flamingo, then it doesn't make much difference. However, depending on who's launching the Flamingo missiles, Germans, Frenchmen, British, I don't know who they are, and from where they launched it and whatever they hit, they could escalate tensions with Russia. And the Russians have been very clear. They have the capacity to hit targets all up and down the edge of NATO. Poland, Romania, Lithuania, all of these countries that have NATO bases and any NATO troops in them would be at risk. They're not going to tolerate attacks by the British, the French, and the Germans under the guise that these are coming from Ukraine, because they know they're not Ukrainian manufactured. They're not Ukrainian inventions.
All right. So what now then? So we've got this meeting canceled. Everyone's looking forward to it. The war continues. Things are not looking on the ground. People continue dying on a daily basis. Both parties are on 2 separate pages. Zelensky wants to freeze the battlefront, freeze the current lines, stop the fighting, immediate ceasefire. Putin prefers to either continue or gain Donbass, at least gain the Donbass. How would a middle ground look like for this to end? And what would you do if you were Trump?
Well, let's first of all ask the question, the first question that you asked, what can be done about this? And the short answer is that we can do nothing. We are not the military hegemon. In other words, we are not so vastly superior in our military power that we can dominate Eastern Europe and Russia. It can't be done. That was my point earlier. Russia is a continental power, a land power. We are primarily a maritime and naval power. That's very important to understand. We don't have the staying power in the Eastern Hemisphere. It would be as if the Russians were heavily engaged in Mexico, building up forces there to attack us. That would be insane, because we would be the dominant force that they could not possibly resist. So in truth, what can we do? The only thing we can do is essentially what I think President Trump set out to do, which is tell Zelensky to shut up and color. And that's what he has to do. You don't let a small power that is already in the middle of a hopelessly lost war that has cost 1.7 to 1.8 million Ukrainians in uniform, done irreparable damage to generations of Ukrainians. There are many people that don't think the Ukrainian nation will survive this. Now, that's the truth. And what President Trump has said, it's time to stop. We need to get the best possible outcome that we can get. Recognize what we cannot demand. Recognize what we think we can get. There was no willingness on Zelensky's side to do that. So President Trump, I think, would like to wash his hands of the whole thing. I told him that I thought that was the best thing for him to do from the very beginning. Listen, I didn't start this. I don't support it. We're leaving. We're out. And the Europeans are full of nonsense. These people have nothing to offer. They don't have armies to send. And if they tried to, they'd all be obliterated.
Yeah, there's been reports earlier that the US is moving their military, a lot of their military installations away from Eastern Europe, at least military support from Eastern Europe. There were unconfirmed reports which showed, and then also there was the post in Truth Social by Trump where he said, Zelensky could regain all their territory back, maybe go further. Good luck to them with the support of support of NATO and support of the EU. So it looked like that he was washing his hands early on. Is that an indication that if Zelensky does not accept a deal now, there is a possibility that Trump does walk away? Because we also know he wants to achieve peace. He wants that achievement like he had in the Middle East.
Well, what does he have in the Middle East?
At least a ceasefire for now. I know there's a lot of holes in it.
I don't think so. I think the Israelis are doing exactly what the hell they want to do. I don't think they give a damn about any of the alleged agreements that were made. And I didn't see Hamas or Netanyahu